Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Sejohn Report. Let me introduce you to your host companions, Sejohn Sarowick.
Oh, I'm supposed to talk at this part. I'm sorry, sir. I was very stunned by the gruff voice that was coming from the other end of
That's
the microphone.
fine. We all
Okay.
get spooked sometimes.
Spooked wouldn't be the word. To be honest, it was more out of concern for whatever is wrong with you.
Oh, nothing's wrong with me. I'm living my best life. I'm grabbing life by the haunches and fucking myself. All right, that's enough. That's enough. Thank you so much for stopping by, but we got
Hi.
this.
I'm glad Al Pacino could stop in for 2 seconds.
Hooah! And I'm your other host companion, Devon Decker. Sejohn, do you want a proper introduction to yourself? I'm sorry. I was checking stuff on the other side of the basement, and
then Pacino got in. I know it's a real problem in Rhode Island. You guys really got to start like fumigating for them.
It's just because we have so many Dunkin' Donuts.
It's better than the James Woods infection that goes all over Warwick, but that's fine.
Why do you think I don't go to Warwick? It's because of James Woods. I'm just gonna put it explicitly out there. He loves buying yogurt, from what I hear.
At CVS, specifically at CVS.
So weird. Anywho, hi, hello, welcome to the Say Report, and it's a Say Report. That's an ending, but not a bad ending. Just like a season finale. We've made it to the end of season 4, and the best part about it being the end of season 4 is that next week, when we start season 5, it'll only be 2 more days before President-elect Joseph Biden is sworn in as our 46th president.
Jesus, Devin, what year is it? I
know.
Did
what a week this year has been.
Yeah, right? We have not recorded since everything went down.
Okay, so the last episode of the Say Report, we were talking happily about my birthday, and there was nothing bad. And no, we haven't recorded. We had a conversation on January 6th just to make sure that both of us were alive and okay.
Yeah, right.
Because I did not have on my 2021 bingo card insurrection. Not even like Star Trek insurrection as a joke.
Oh no. We have to point something out here, right? We have talked in the past about my feelings on this, and the idea that like a year is never like January 1st to December 31st. A year is generally more often about like halfway through February sometime, once we all get our bearings, generally up until about February sometime of the next year.
You kind of run off of an Oscars schedule. That's how I've always determined it. I could say it's like a Chinese calendar that you follow, but I think specifically with you, it is the Oscars calendar that Sejohn lives and dies by.
It isn't. It's one of those things where that happens at the end of my year, but that's not my religion, so I don't really celebrate it type of thing. Like the idea being more that we are still facing some of the runoff of 2020. And if you think back on 2020, like shit didn't pop off until, into February, March, right? Like that's really when things started to go crazy for 2020. So now when we all look back on 2020 and we talk about what a shit year it is, we're actually ignoring like 2 months of that year. Because I don't know about you, but I had a hell of a January and February. I went to New York. I got to go to Sundance and see a friend's movie at Sundance, which is now up on HBO, Leanda Negra. I'm never going to not say it every time I talk about it. But like, I had like a hell of a fucking time for 2 months out of last year, and then it all went to pot. But it's not over yet, is all I'm saying, is we've got a couple of weeks here, and that is none more evident than what happened last week.
You know who I really feel bad for? I mean, like, there are people who are hurt and all that, but I feel bad that Bill Maher doesn't come back until this Friday, because he would have gone ham if his first episode of season 19 aired after what happened in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, like, it's actually, he's got some time for some other stuff to build, because now he also gets to talk about how we all reacted to it. But you're not wrong. If he had had the ability to have his voice heard on Friday, I'm sure he would have pissed his own pants with joy. Yeah, man, yeah. There's a lot of weird, well, what it is I think what that highlights for me is there's there's this weird sense right now for all of us over here on the state side. I know we have one or two people that listen from across the way, but the idea being that like it hasn't quite hit me exactly what happened. And I'm not saying like I don't think what happened was a big deal right now. I clearly understand that it was a huge fucking deal. But for me to be able to really like to contextualize it within history, like it's not going to hit for a few years how fucking crazy what just happened was, right? Because like we are talking about like an attempted armed takeover of the American government occurred last week. How fucking like in our lifetime, with well within like the our sense of like safe space, like we were all under the assumption that like shit was bad, but we didn't think it was that bad. And like I'm as guilty of that as the next guy for feeling that way is all I'm saying.
I mean, you nailed it. You nailed it. 3 days later, not 3 days, to Sunday, so that's 4 days.
Yep.
4 days later, it was recontextualized when other footage was released of just how violent what occurred at the Capitol on Wednesday truly was.
Yeah, man. I mean, we were seeing pictures of guys with masks on, and clearly some of them armed, and there was this feeling that they were doing this armed, and that should have been bad enough. But something for me that really hit was then we saw that a lot of them also had well, so they are the plastic handcuffs that like, you know, the zip ties that they go in and they handcuff people with, but also someone then pointing out that like you don't just go out and buy like that grade of zip tie. Like those are ones that like you prep with, like you talk to a military prep store or a police department or like you can the road to being as prepared as some of these guys were paved with people that should have been asking more questions.
And that's the scariest part about it.
Right.
Is that this rose up in silence, but like not really in silence as we're finding out, because there was chatter, there was talk. You know, we've known about these homegrown militias that, you know, Donald Trump has been encouraging, you know, stand down and stand by, that type of stuff. Count the votes, don't count the votes. Those protests, these people existed. This is not something that like just happened to happen on January 6, 2021. These people were preparing. But then when you see not just the footage that the news was able to get on the day, which was horrifying in itself, especially some of the stuff of like selfies with Capitol police officers, like that shook me to see that. Like, you know, I've seen it around on social media, those people asking, you know, where were the police in this? Are you also asking where's Miley while Hannah Montana's on stage? Yeah. Like, because there was evidence that supported that this was. I mean, we've also found out that the representative from West Virginia was involved in this. Like,
a young state rep there was there. The one that really got me is there was an article that just came out about two police officers in Roanoke, North Carolina. I want to say Roanoke is in that area, being let go for right now. I can't speak to the exact terms of where they stand. Odds are in this country that they're still getting paid, but now they just get to sit at home. But anyway, being put on leave for a bit because it was discovered that they were there and they are police officers, and obviously the people in that town had a huge issue with that. And then one of them had the nerve to come out and talk about how they were not one of the quote unquote bad ones, and this whole conversation about how they were just hanging out with the Capitol Police, that like Capitol Police were letting them and their particular group just into the building, and then said stuff like they handed us water and snacks. like thinking that this is clearing him, saying the police were right there with us, when in reality what he's doing is just driving home how deep the issue is, and thinking that puts him in the clear somehow is a scary thing to begin with. But like pointing to the fact that like there were then that what that all that implies is that there were people there that were, one, prepared for them, and B, like welcomed them with open arms. Yeah.
It's terrifying. And right now, as we record this, there is discussion going on in Washington about impeaching Trump or enacting the 25th Amendment. Yeah. And so maybe by the time we record next week, he won't be 46, Joe Biden. He'll be 47 because Mike Pence will get the shortest presidential, you know, time
Yeah.
ever. And I
Yeah.
feel bad for William Henry Harrison because, like, that's been his record for so long.
I mean, like, let's not kid ourselves though. Like, it's not going to happen in the next few days. There's
No.
still talk about, even after Biden is inaugurated, still pursuing this. And for anybody wondering why they would do that, keep in mind that, like, by impeaching him for real, he loses a lot of benefits, including his salary for the rest of his life that presidents get. Also, he loses the Secret Service detail, which I was not aware was a thing that was a possibility.
Yeah,
If he actually gets fully, truly impeached. And it has to be, and it can't be like a Nixon impeachment where then the Senate just didn't do anything about it, or like Trump's first impeachment. I cannot believe that's something we can say, but like,
I mean, that's what was going on a year ago.
You
You talk about,
right.
you know, the tail end of 2019 in the Sejohn calendar is like the man who, you know, pushed people towards insurrection a week ago was under the microscope for impeachment a year ago.
I mean, and that's where a lot of these particular senators that didn't vote for his impeachment, let me put it that way, because we all know what that actually means. But anyway, senators that did not vote for his impeachment are now, like, handfuls of them are coming out and being like, I don't know if I can relate to the Republican Party anymore. And it's like, hey, you had an out, man. Like, a year ago, you were given the keys to this car and asked to drive, and you said, "No, I'm gonna sit in the back seat still." Like, you don't get to come out now and talk about, like, how things have changed or you weren't aware. Like, yeah. Sorry.
I mean, no, it's and people like that, but there also does need to be some understanding for those people who were just following party lines and for, like, realizing I didn't know it had gotten this bad and maybe wanted to take a step back. Those people in a position of power who wasted that power a year ago in order to hold on to their own power, fuck them. I agree with you that, like, you were given a time and a place. You could have acted a year ago and potentially stopped what happened.
I will meet you at this point. I will say, if there is anybody on this God-given earth who was really that naive to believe that things were not, like, this bad when they had the evidence that they had in front of them, I can forgive that. And I say that as somebody that admitted not just 10 minutes ago of being in that same position, right? But if you are going to be in a position of senator, representative in this country at that level, and to act like you have not had people screaming this as a possibility at you, that's where I start to have an issue. Is, like, as somebody that didn't necessarily, like, do his work, but I'm also a guy sitting in my basement in Utah. Like, it's not my job to necessarily keep up on some of these threats. In fact, I couldn't do some of the research that's now coming out, which is stuff like FBI like talks and debriefings and stuff that they had available to them that they just ignored, that, like, is not available to us in the public. Like, it's one thing for me to say I wasn't aware. It's another thing for them to have the FBI coming to them and saying, hey, these guys are a certain problem, and them just ignoring that. That's crazy.
Right. I guess where I'm talking is that, like, again, those people in a position of power who ignored everything because I guess they wanted to hold on to their power. Like, the big thing about an impeachment now, from where I'm sitting, is I feel like it takes the leg out from under the Republican Party becoming the party of Trump.
Yeah.
I feel like, because then he can't run in 2024 if he is impeached. It'd be really hard for him to put up Donald Jr. or Ivanka or Barron or Eric in that order. I think that's the order of succession of the Trump children. That if their father was impeached, like, this is the chance for the Republicans who feel like they are completely in the weeds and this has gotten out of control, to press the reset button on that party and try to get back to what their ideals were. And whether or not you agree with the ideals of the Republican Party, it's pretty easy to say that you do not agree with the ideals and actions of Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, I think people smarter than us are no doubt taking the opportunity right now to behind closed doors talk about this as being the out for a lot of these people that to be fair, a month ago or a year ago when the first impeachment was coming around didn't know how things were going to play out. And I don't mean that in terms of the insurrection. I mean that in terms of like the Georgia elections. Like they were staring down the barrel of possibly taking like the full control of the government within this year. Like they did not that now knowing how the cards lie for the next 4 years, I'm sure a lot more people would be much more willing to kind of open their ears. But yeah, man, I am very curious to see how this particular impeachment process plays out for a lot of reasons, not least of which because it's the second time that we are impeaching him, which is crazy. Yeah, like that alone is history making. But then on top of that, it's going to be after he's been lost the presidency already. Like it's also going to be due to an armed insurrection on the government in the year 2020. Like it's crazy.
The situation there. And the one thing that I do also want to add, and I know it seems crazy, but it's something that I was forced to look up over the weekend as the discussion of impeaching Donald Trump came up in this House. And it was believed that, well, but once he's out of office, the impeachment, there's nothing. No, you're still held accountable for crimes that you commit while you're the president.
Yeah, like and the active impeachment. Yeah, and the active impeachment. Like I said, like I too was the first thought I had was like, do they even have time to do this? It wasn't even whether or not it was worth it, because I felt even if it is on the last day that they can get it passed, that it's totally worth it just to prove a fucking point. That's besides it though, because then people started talking about how like there's all of this stuff that he then loses. He loses so many privileges and abilities going forward. Let's talk about just security clearance. He is actually right now set to have a certain level of security clearance. It'll never be as high as when he was actually president. But if he leaves this office unimpeached, he will always have a level of security clearance that will allow him information that we now know he would use against our government. I'm not even saying who.
That's a pretty compelling argument you just made there, Sejohn. Are you part of the prosecuting? Because
I mean, like that alone, is reason enough to say to him, and they could, and you know, argument there could be made. Security clearances can be handled differently, but right now there's nothing down written about how it would be handled. He is always going to be that level of presidency that allows him to walk into a room and say, "I was the president." Like, open the door. Like, yeah. And then,
security. The big thing for me is the secret security detail.
Yeah.
The fact that part of my tax dollars would be paying to protect that person who does not value what this country stands for. Like, and I don't want that. That upsets me. That upset me as soon as he was elected president, let alone now, where I see just how much contempt he has for America. Just, yeah.
No, it's crazy, man. I cannot fathom anybody that doesn't want to go forward with this at this point. Obviously, there's one or two people that are key that are obviously not going to go for this. I don't think that you're going to see Mitch McConnell or a Lindsey Graham or a Ted Cruz suddenly like turn around and say, actually, we were wrong for the last 4 years. Let's do this. Which is weird because, in all honesty, at this point, they would catch a ton of shit from other people, but I personally wouldn't I would not hold it against them if they took this as their out. I would certainly have some feelings about the fact that they didn't come out earlier, but it wouldn't be anything that would make me hate them any more or less than I already do. You know what I mean?
I do. I know exactly what you mean. Like, this is this is the opportunity, and there's no bigger representation of that than the two senators who were prepared on January 6th to go and say, we do not stand by the electoral college ballots. We contest this election, saying, after everything that happened, I can no longer in good conscience do that.
Yeah.
Like, that right there. Like, they saw the opportunity to be like, I kind of want to fall on the right side of history. And while I'll be included in the discussion as someone who was complicit up to a point, I do want people to read the history books someday and say, wow, even as your life was threatened by the people that he riled up into a fervor, you stood by him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's go like full Hunter S. Thompson on this thing. Like, let's call out everybody for a minute here and fucking point out like the guys that I cannot believe are going to come out smelling like roses. Top of that list is Mike Pence. Like, really, honestly, after all of this, he is still going to be seen as a lizard person for the rest of his life. But there is never going to be the stink on him as like a Donald Trump Jr., as you pointed out earlier, right? Like, if we saw Mike Pence 12 years from now, like running for a particular office or maybe being a personality on Fox, and like it's gonna be like the way people talk about Ollie North now. Is like, hey, we all remember when this dude like fucked everything up, right? And everybody just nods in agreement, like, yeah, we all remember, but we don't do anything about it. like that's gonna be Pence for the rest of his life. And I can't.
Ollie North's got a pretty catchy song about what he did in Iran Contra. And he's on Fox News. You're not wrong. It is the kind of thing that, like, Pence, because of his actions on that date, has a semi-path to redemption. I don't think he could ever be president. I feel like there's still some stink on him, but he could still be someone
he could have a cabinet position, though. If somewhere along the line somebody said to him, like, oh, we're going to make him Secretary of State, even, like, I would not be surprised, and I bet there would be support for it. Like not from me, but you get what I'm saying.
I don't know. Right. I get what you're saying. Yeah. It's like somewhere down the line, a Republican wins office again and decides, I want Mike Pence in my corner. I don't think there'd be a huge outcry because of the way that he acted on that date.
Yeah. Yeah, man, we are witnessing history in the making, and as I said at the beginning of this, it has not quite hit me yet.
Dude, yeah, like our children's children, right, will read about this the way that we read about Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, our kids in the year 2080 will be reading from their books printed from the year 2030 about this. Yeah.
Awful. Just all. You really, I mean, I have to imagine that by 2080, we're no longer printing things. Everything's got to be electronic.
We won't have to print things, but there's going to be a huge fuck you to the Amazon lobby that'll exist within the next few years. You watch.
Jesus. Wait, Amazon the jungle or Amazon the company?
It's going to start with the company, but some corporation's going to take it over and slowly start pivoting it.
I mean, Jeff Bezos, if he really wanted to, like, he should own the Amazon rainforest. If I were Jeff Bezos with the amount of money that Jeff Bezos has, I would try to own the rainforest. I mean,
no longer the most money, though, as we also learned this week.
Oh, geez. Thank God. Okay, there's the end of the political 20 minutes of the Say Report. Important things that needed to be discussed, and I don't doubt that a week from now, there's probably going to be some more politics that sneak into it, because we live in a world where political things happen.
We live in a society, but yes.
But yeah, that's another thing. And what was really strange about Jeff Bezos being passed by the tortoise that is Elon Musk is the tweet that Elon Musk sent out.
He's kind of a tortoise, but he's like a tortoise on crack. But anyway,
I mean, it was just tortoise in the hair there. That's all I was going for. I was getting my Aesops on. I apologize for it. But him saying, Elon Musk, as he is declared the richest man in the world, my son came to me today and said, Dad, I just want everybody to get through this. And, like, it's hard for me to look at that and, like, your dad could make things a lot easier for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's your son telling you maybe you should spend some of that fucking money.
I think that maybe your son sat and watched Wonder Woman 84 with you and was like, maybe there's a chance. Maybe I'm Alistair Lord.
Oh, man.
But yeah, Elon Musk, like, how do you... So if you're Jeff Bezos, right? How do you feel when someone has, like, $1 trillion more than you?
You feel nothing.
Yeah,
like, that's the big thing, right? Is like everybody's like, oh, poor Jeff Bezos, ha ha ha. And Jeff Bezos probably didn't even feel it. Like sitting on his fucking like his throne of swords, like did not even feel the bite. Like
this is like... Jeff Bezos finding out that he's no longer the richest person in America, in the world, listening to the Say Report. Because I have to imagine that, like, he's so into his company and what he does, he has to listen to everything that's on there, right? So he's going through the podcasts. And
we get to say we were acquired by Amazon. I want to say that.
I don't know. No, I don't want to say that. I mean, that has a Borg tinge to it that I don't love. Acquired is essentially the PC version of Assimilated.
Yeah.
It tests better with the 24 to 30 range. But it's one of those things that, like, and I'm not saying in 2021. I'm saying that Jeff Bezos, it is the far-flung year 2047, and he is listening. He's finally catching up on the podcast backlog, because he's probably more machine than man at this point. And he's listening to this episode at that time, and that's when he finds out that in 2021, I wasn't the richest guy in the world for a second.
For like a hot second. I mean, that's the other thing, right? Is like Jeff Bezos is one of those dudes that plays the long game his entire life. So he's just, all he needs to do is wait for Elon Musk to have to pay back a quarter of his debt, and he will be the richest man again.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's all, and that's it. But I really like the thought of future Jeff Bezos, like, smiling a little bit because, like, he's getting talked about on the Say Report.
Mm-hmm. After some poor intern has just fed a punch card into his his computer-based water living station that he is now in 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. But that punch card had episode 208 of the Say Report, and he's like, I remember it. That was a weird week, huh? Having a little less money than Elo. Hey, they're talking about me.
Elo version 1.3. Yes. Yeah, man. So we are on Amazon. Like, I'm going to take the opportunity because we got to talk about some Luna for a second.
We do have to talk about some Luna for a second. Still haven't been playing it since the last time I said I wasn't going to be playing it. However, because I misunderstood the terms, I did not cancel my subscription. I thought that I had until the 8th, but it renewed on the 7th. So I was a little confused when I went to go cancel it and saw, oh no, okay, so I have another month of Amazon Luna. So then, I had some thoughts, I had some choice words about Blasphemous, and while I was very mean to Amazon Luna and the fact that it couldn't have a stable connection to save itself, which was insane to me considering I was playing actual 3D rendered games on Stadia, over Wi-Fi, not right next to my router, and having no issue. But the 2D game, that's a year old, that was having problems.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That don't really jive in my mind. I don't get it. I do need to issue an apology to Blasphemous, because I said that they hadn't fixed any of these glaring problems, like Y-vector locations for drops, and many other things. Come to find out, because I've been looking into getting Blasphemous on another console or another way to play, and the Amazon version is on 1.0.13, but Blasphemous itself is in its 2.0 iteration. A year after the release of Blasphemous, they released this huge DLC pack for free that updated the game, fixed a bunch of bugs, gave new play modes that actually spoke to everybody calling it the Dark Souls 2D, where, like, when you die, instead of just having some guilt that lowers your magic meter, you lose all of your currency unless you can recollect it. Like, changes to the game that made the game better, and I'm not saying like a No Man's Sky version of it, because No Man's Sky, when it came out, was not very good, but I do want to say that Blasphemous, playing it in that 1.013 version that I played, it's 1.013, not 1.3, it's specifically 13, it was still enjoyable except for the issues, and those issues have been fixed, but for some reason that I do not understand, like, the guy in charge of downloading the update at Amazon Luna, I guess just keeps hitting remind me later. Like, I don't...
Well, it's weird, right? Because you have to assume that, like, we have assumed from the beginning, and it is an assumption, I should say that, is that both the way that this cloud gaming stuff has been working is it's working off of a centralized, for lack of a better understanding, computer that everybody is tapping into and playing off of, right? And so the PC versions of Blasphemous at this time are updated. So why is this version not? That's a very odd. They don't. It's not like when they have to put a specific patch out for PlayStation, a specific patch out for Xbox, a specific patch out, because when they say we have to put a patch out for PC, like that's every, like that hits every market. When, like, that's really weird to me that the cloud-based streaming version is not that.
And it's what's even stranger is that released in August of 2020. Luna didn't release until November of 2020.
So they started off with an old version.
So it's like they downloaded it before, and then they were just like, oh, we're never going to update this stuff. It speaks to a fear of cloud gaming that had never entered my mind. Because another big appeal of the cloud gaming environment is that you'll never have to download patches, right? It's not like when I sit down to play Avengers and, like, come to find out, oh, there's a 55 gig patch that you need to download before you get to play Avengers.
Right.
Hope you got 4 hours to wait for that before, and then you can still play. And it's like, no, and then I go back and I play Mega Man or something that doesn't have a patch.
I mean, like, one of the dream scenarios is that you go to your physical copy of Avengers, realize that it has an update that is necessary, so it needs 4 hours for that to happen. But what you can do in the meantime is stream, and maybe it's not going to be the clearest quality, maybe it's not going to be the most precise, like, control option, but for 4 hours you can put up with those little miseries in order to be able to get into the game right now. And then once the update, and play the updated version, and then once the updated version is done on your own device, then you can hop over to the physical copy and you'll be up to snuff, right? Like, that is almost the way that cloud gaming was kind of sold to me, was the ability to be able to, like, to hop on and get the latest and greatest at your fingertips without the wait, with, like, a couple of sacrifices here or there, but, like, it would be more than made up by the fact that I would have access to a large number of games, the most up-to-date version of games, and, like, there's a sense of like I've been lied to in finding this out.
But granted, it is Luna, so it's not Stadia, which I've been singing the praises of Stadia on this show since its release, that, like, it surprised me right off the bat. And Sejohn got on board the Stadia train this past November, and I feel like you're enjoying your time with it. In fact, there are times where you're like, I'm going to jump on Stadia, and I'm like, oh, really? Yeah, I can do that. Like,
Yeah. I will say that I have been peeking. I don't know if I would consider it cheating on Stadia, but I have been peeking at Shadow the last couple of days. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I have. I've heard of Shadow. I'm interested, but I haven't done any due diligence on it.
Yeah. So the idea of streaming with Shadow is that you have your own. You can use your own library of games, whether it's EA's game channel.
Game
what do they call
Pass.
it?
EA Game Pass.
Yeah. Whether you have that, whether you have your Windows catalog with, like, all of your Xbox games, or Steam, like, the idea is you own the game. But what you can do is you can actually run the game through a client that has, like, top of the line hardware somewhere along the way. So, like, you can actually get, like, some fucking crazy ass, like, ray tracing and 4K and all of this nonsense stuff that, like, people like to buy into, and you don't have to spend the money on building, like, a monster PC. You can actually stream your own game through a better system. You just need, the only thing that you are required to really have in that situation is top of the line internet. And for a lot of guys, that's if they're already at that point where they're considering this, that's not an issue. They probably already have it.
I mean,
so, like, this,
and that's not a huge barrier to entry. If it's a question, no, in certain parts of the country, but, like, if I'm staring down the barrel of build a 10,000 plus PC, right? That will eventually become obsolete and require more money from me to stay at the level it is. I mean, it's obsolete the second I complete the build, right? Just the speed that technology
you
works.
open the package, exactly. Yeah.
So if I can spend if I can take that $10,000 and just have a PC that can connect to Shadow, and I'm paying whatever the subscription is to Shadow, and then just the fastest available internet where I currently live, in the long run, I'm saving money.
And in the other big boon to all of that is, as I was saying, is you own the games in your own way. Now you have to deal with the fact that, like, God forbid Steam ever disappears and you've lost your whole Steam library, that's a whole other
That's something that I
subset of
never
fears
want
I
to
have
think
buried.
about. Don't do
Right,
that.
exactly, exactly. But like, but that's one of the few legitimate knocks I still have against something like a Stadia, is that Google, a service known for having the rug kind of pulled out from under its customers sometimes when they finally say, yeah, we're dropping service for this because we've gotten what we wanted out of it, we're done with it, and you're just like, but it was successful. Google Fiber. But anyway, there's a fear there, right? And I completely get that. So when people are like, yeah, I don't want to spend $100 on a Stadia controller just to find out in 2 months I can't use it on anything, like I can appreciate that. And Shadow kind of removes that entire element to it. If that service ever stops, it's a bummer that service ever stops, but you still got your games you can play. You just got to play them in a different way. Like it's almost like you're renting like a higher end PC to play your games on, and you just understand that like whenever you stop paying for that, you just don't have that higher end PC. You can still do what you want with it though. That feels good, right? In a way that Stadia kind of still has a little bit of squishiness to it. But yeah, man, compared to Luna, Stadia is a fucking dream.
Yeah, when I found that out, I couldn't believe it. I honestly couldn't believe it. I was watching somebody stream Blasphemous, and I'm like, this looks like night and day. And then I did the research and saw, oh, that's because it is.
Yeah.
Like, Luna has the night version, and there's a daytime version where you can feel the sun on your face, and the game works properly.
I mean, a full numbered update more
Ridiculous.
is crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's not even like they're on 2.0 and the 2.14 is what's out right now. Like like the fact that they're a numbered version behind is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned.
Now, granted, I mean, this is all stuff that I checked, but then when I did look today, Luna did have an update, and I'm like, I don't have time to download you, update to Luna. So maybe, like, because they knew that I was going to do something, they updated. But more than likely, 2047 Jeff Bezos just heard that Blasphemous isn't up to date and just, like, downloaded the update file. So now from 1.0.13, it's now on, like, V5.2. And congratulations, 2047 listeners.
And it's hosted on good old games.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Oh, good old games. I don't really have an issue with them. It's just...
Except that they don't just do old games anymore. Stick to what you're good at, bums. Anyway. Yeah, man. So that was that interesting news about Luna. Interesting stuff for you to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So
I am trying to figure out if it's time for us to talk about the rabbit hole I fell down over the weekend.
I mean, let's be honest. We were just talking about streaming entertainment, and it's just a hop, skip, and a jump into the rabbit hole that you determined for yourself. I don't know how to describe what you did this weekend. So I'm going to yield the floor to you, sir.
So this little party starts with Sundance, 2021 Sundance. I have been kind of keeping my ear to the ground, trying to figure out what the great state of Utah's wonderful film festival was going to do. Little thing that you might not have heard of. But this idea that Sundance was going to be kind of a no-go this year has been the talk of the town for a bit, right? And so the obvious answer was going to be streaming. The obvious answer was going to be going to online sessions and just putting the movies out there and to be able to see. And like for some people, they were just convinced that it was just going to be like, oh yeah, they're just going to put a $400 thing out there where you just pay money and then you can see everything. And they were kind of right about that. But it was not just that. They've actually put this whole like tiered system out where if you want to watch the movie within like this like 3-hour premiere window, you can just pay $15 and then you can see that one movie. If you want to see stuff for the day, they've got day passes. If you want stuff that's going to be just like specifically just all the short films, you can buy the short film package. There's a very kind of complicated. Once you kind of read the rules, it's not that bad, but it looks a little convoluted to start with, like system in which Sundance is going to handle things this year. So I am going to see a couple of days worth of the content, plus because we got in on that, where we're getting like access to a whole bunch of like the really cool indie stuff, true indie stuff, like the whole time. It's going to be pretty rad. And the fact that I'll be able to watch it all from the comfort of my own home is like obviously is kind of just like a really nice bonus. So that whole thing had me like thinking about, man, this world has come real far in terms of streaming. And because of that, I somehow got into a conversation with you the other day where I was like, you know what? Like I wanted, I want to sit down and do as close to like a scientific approach as I can to figuring out what is worth even being like tied into anymore. Because we've talked about like the idea that there's way too many streaming services out. On top of that, there's been a huge spotlight cast on a very specific one in the year 2021 with The Office leaving Netflix and going to Peacock. There was a huge movement of people that said like, well, obviously I'm just going to go get Peacock now, buy Netflix, and then like pretty quickly ran the fuck away from Peacock. And that was kind of interesting. We didn't really talk about it much last week, but we might have even mentioned it in a joke, but like there has been a number of people who have had some real issues with Peacock. And so like
NBC botched that. NBC botched that in like the biggest ways possible. And you don't need to look any further than their updated tier explanation for Peacock to see that. Because it's all Office based.
Yes.
Peacock free, you'll get the access to the first 2 seasons of The Office, and there'll be ads. Peacock Premium, you'll have access to all of The Office, but there'll still be ads. Peacock Premium, no ads. Well, you'll have all The Office and no ads. And it's like, wow, like that was it, right? NBC was just like, we're going to bank on The Office 10 years later.
Yeah, people joked about like the Wii becoming their Netflix machine, but like Peacock is right now simply just an Office machine. Like that, like it is basically the only way to get to watch The Office, and they're real proud of that fact. And like, you know, libraries change. We've seen that with other services. Like this is the same issue that people had when Disney Plus first started, and they were like, there's not much on it, but weirdly, like they've been finding more and more. Plus, things have been added, and like that is a criticism that I think every service is going to have to deal with at first. There's going to be a contingency of the audience that feels like it's not enough. That's not the only problem with Peacock, though, right? Just like as you pointed out, like there's also this idea that like you're paying money and now there's an ad tier. There's the idea that there is like a free part of the service that I wasn't even aware of until I went today. That was just news to me that there was a level of it that was free. And like, I get that might not be the case for everybody, but if there is even a handful of people out there that don't know that there's a free part of your app, that you've done something wrong in your marketing, right? Like that's the part you should be selling. Is like, here is Peacock and it's free. Plus, if you want to pay us some money, here's some other things you can get. That's supposed to be like the carrot, right?
The problem is their free is so awful.
Yes.
Like, at least when it first rolled out, like it was this thing where it felt like their marketing strategy was, we have this free tier, but we're going to make it as terrible as possible so that people will say, I'll give you $5 to make this work.
I'll give you $5 to just be better. Yeah, man, for sure. Yeah, so with the kind of the revelation of a bunch of people moving to Peacock and suddenly having all of these ideas and feelings about the flaws of it, which I think has slowly started to kind of turn into a not hearing as much shit being given to places like Netflix and Hulu right now, because like a bunch of people were, I don't know, under the impression anybody could do it, and now they're slowly starting to realize maybe not anybody can, because Peacock's not the first app that we've seen kind of flounder and fail in this realm.
It's not even the first one from NBC.
Yeah.
CISO, baby.
Yeah.
And what even makes it crazier, I'm sorry to cut you off here, is that they were part of Hulu.
Yeah.
They were part of the conglomerate that built Hulu. So, like, their hubris is weirdly earned by being like, we were part of Hulu. And then, like, so what? CISO failed. We have The Office. Like, no.
Yeah, it's like the only thing that they learned from CISO, and I wouldn't even say learned because I don't think it was a lesson to be learned, is that they didn't have the right content. And it's like, no, that wasn't the biggest issue with CISO. The biggest, a lot of the issues I had with CISO was quality and also the fact that like weirdly placed cut ads and like not full ads. Same problem I had on Peacock today. I watched something on Peacock, and we'll get to that in a bit, but every ad section for it was an ad for The Office, surprise, surprise, and it always felt like it was coming in the middle of a commercial and would always leave mid-sentence on a commercial. Like, it wasn't like a full commercial for The Office. It would, like, cut to commercial, and it would just be like, and Pam and Jim, who you know you love, right? We know you... back to the show. What? What the fuck? Like, where did I go for a second? Like, I just stopped off in Scranton for like 30 seconds.
All that does is support my theory that they're just trying to annoy you. They're not even trying to get your money. They're just trying to be like, this is fucking annoying, right? Like
Yeah.
these weird interruptions that aren't commercials. You know how to deal with commercials. You don't know how to deal with like half information.
Yeah.
Give us $5.
If there weren't
We'll
like
fix
laws in
that.
place in certain parts of this country about volume control now, because that is now a thing, because thanks to like YouTube and Hulu, I can guarantee you they'd be doing the loud volume commercial thing too,
Yeah.
where like it would cut from The Office being at like volume 50 to like volume 100 for the commercial and then back. Oh yeah. Oh man. So I wanted to try a little bit of everything, right? Like that was kind of my thing. Is I was like, before I dive into the Sundance stuff, which is probably going to be a level unto itself because it's going to have the entire support of the film industry behind it, so that's going to be wild to check out when it comes out next week. But I wanted to see what these other people kind of had to offer. You know, Netflix and Hulu are things that we talk about a lot, and we have definitely been talking a lot the past year about like Disney Plus, but like, there's other stuff out there, right? And I wanted to know like what people were kind of watching and into. So I went into a dive of watching something I'd never seen before on everything. I wanted something new, preferably made by them if possible, by the service if possible. If not, I you know, at least what could they provide otherwise? And I think I actually managed to find new stuff. I think, and I say but what I did is I went to Devon. I was like, name one thing that is like specific to each possible streaming service that is like something that when you think of this service, you think of this show, and I'm gonna watch it, and we're gonna talk about like how did it do, like how well did it stream, did I find the content good, like what was the experience like for me, and so he gave me a pretty good solid list of things, and I some of them I have I have some questions about why, for instance, when I mentioned Netflix, the recommendation for me was Mako Mermaids.
Well, all right. You're changing my words, and what I said was, if Mako Mermaids counts, then Mako Mermaids. If not, then Emily in Paris. I was specific in knowing, because it's not. That one's not just Netflix. That's an international like companion deal where Netflix is paying half of the money for this Australian show.
I'll tell you why I chose this, and the same goes for the Hulu conversation that we should have too. Because for Hulu, I'll just say, you suggest I check out Letterkenny, which I was in a heartbeat. Like, yeah. So what you get a lot on Hulu and Netflix that people don't necessarily realize is you get a lot of stuff that has already been produced, and they're doing the Hollywood thing where they come in and give money to it in order to show it to us here in America. Whether it's because it's been on the air in another country and it's done really well, so they want to bring it over to the States, they go to Netflix and Netflix brings it over, or it could be something like what happened with Cuties, and that's important to talk about.
That is very
because
important.
A lot of people were like, I can't believe Netflix would do this. Oh, that's a bunch of Netflix execs just sitting there being super pervy and stuff like that. And it's like, no, this was a thing that existed already in another part of the world, and they needed some money in order to actually get it out to an audience. And so Netflix steps in and is like, here's like, this is already getting a lot of critical praise. We're gonna put some money behind this because market says that this is the thing to put money behind. Now, like, that's not saying you don't have the right to complain about what the businesses do. Like, everybody has the right to like put your money where you want. If you don't want to pay for Netflix anymore because you're not happy with something that they put money towards, I get that. But to talk about like the artists at Netflix, people don't. Like half the shows they talk about aren't actually made by Netflix. So something like Mako Mermaids is important because it was this hugely successful, actually spin-off of another successful show in Australia, right?
Yeah, H2O, Just Add Water.
Right, and like we're talking about two shows that have combined almost 200 episodes. I think altogether it's like 175 or something like that.
It's something ridiculous.
Like,
I fell in love with H2O, Just Add Water. I was on the Carnival Pride as a passenger. This was also the trip where I decided I'm going to work for Carnival someday. There was a hurricane, so we couldn't do anything. Like, we were stuck in our room because it was rocky and the winds and the rain. So it's like, well, you can't go out on deck. and we can't serve food because, oh my God, it's terrifying. So we sat in our room, and Boomerang, which internationally is a kick-ass channel, it's like a TBS type channel. It's sort of like tween. I don't know. Boomerang is great everywhere but America. Come to find out,
I don't mind Boomerang in America. It's just in America, it's just basically Hanna-Barbera all day every day.
Yeah, exactly. and it's like, and there's something about watching 4 Quick Draw McGraws in a row that makes you want to murder Quick Draw McGraw.
I don't. You're stuck in essentially a hotel room,
right? But Boomerang, the Boomerang that they have on the Carnival ships, they show a lot of international shows, and for some reason during this hurricane, they showed the entirety of the end of season 2 where another girl gets mermaid powers, and because it's not spread out between 3 girls when she gets them, she's basically a sea witch and like wants to destroy them. Like, is real good. Like, I remembered the H2O Just Add Waters that I saw on Nickelodeon that were, I'm not going to say garbage, but they were edited from the original Australian version, so they were a lot more family-friendly than this show that takes, like, just frank looks at issues that are facing teen girls.
Yeah, it's one of those kinds of shows for sure, where, like, the idea is that it's all a metaphor for growing up, right? Like, that whole thing. And I get that. I have to say, though, Mako Mermaids, and I want to know why you chose Mako and not H2O, has this weird element of feeling like it's just leftover footage from H2O. Like, no joke, that at least the pilot episode is maybe 32 minutes long, let's say, and I would say conservatively, like 18 to 20 minutes of it is the three of them just sitting in the grotto, like under the water, CGI tails over what was probably honestly just green screened bathing suits on or something.
Yeah. I will agree that the first episode was very clearly Jonathan Schiffman, I think is the name. Yeah. I know it's Schiffman. I'm not sure of his first name. Being like, I'd really like to explore this world again. Like, you guys are looking for something. We had a hit with H2O Just Add Water, and it came to an ending. I'd like to do something again. So he threw together a sort of pilot to prove that there were still more stories to tell. And the big difference between H2O and Mako Mermaids is that in H2O, it's human girls that get the ability to grow mermaid tails when they get wet. Right. Where in Mako Mermaids, it's mermaids who gain the ability to grow legs when they're on land.
Which doesn't even happen in the first episode, by the way.
No,
the entire episode is so focused on Zach.
It's all about Zach.
Yeah. The merman that we're supposed to, or the new merman that we're supposed to feel somewhat attached to.
And you don't even know what happens. But the other reason why I would focus on Mako and not H2O is that H2O was produced and created, and they got all the funding they could through Australia. Like, that was Australian TV. And when Schiffman wanted to do a follow-up to that, he couldn't get enough funding from Australia, so that's why they shopped it out and got Netflix to agree, because Netflix had H2O Just Add Water and was getting people viewing it, so they're like, oh, if we agree to help produce this, it'll be new content for people. And
weirdly, H2O is one of the very first big successful like Netflix originals, but again, pointing out that they didn't actually touch it. They just came in and paid this company in order to show it.
The reason they were able to use the originals tag is because they also, which is something crazy, but it's how Hulu did it with Letterkenny too. Like, these are the crazy things I noticed, because this is my bread and butter when it comes to streaming services, is seeing international shows in America. Because I'm a sucker for Canadian and Australian television. And before Netflix and Hulu, it was hard to view it. Very difficult. Usually reserved for, like, summer months when CBS needed to fill a night. So they license out one season of a show that has 7. And then
or cable TV like Comedy Central and Sci-Fi.
Exactly.
It took big money to bring these kinds of shows over. Or, I mean, if you want to go so far as to talk about, like, Showtime investing in Trailer Park Boys and stuff like that.
Precisely, like that type of stuff. So what Netflix did was, we're going to do Just Add Water, but we're also going to farm out and do animated versions of existing scripts. And that is technically the Netflix original thing, is that we're producing this animated retelling of the existing scripts from that first season of H2O. So then we also get to call it a Netflix original because of just that weird, this inspired this, which we can then say is inspired by this. It's fascinating.
What really primed us all for that was I can't even think of the specific show, is the Mindy Project. When Hulu started to pick up shows that were getting canceled or like weren't going to make it through their final seasons or whatever, and they had just a big enough fan base where Hulu thought like this would be a wise thing for us to pick up for just one more season. They did that, and they instantly labeled them Hulu originals. Mm-hmm. And I remember having these conversations with people being like, why are they calling it original? I know it was on TV for 2 years before this. And it's like, because they can, because it means nothing in the long run, but at the same time they get to slap their name and logo at the beginning of every episode now because they bought it, because these companies were like, we're not putting any more money into this, and then Hulu and Netflix would show up and be like, we're willing to. So they were able to buy a bunch of pre-made content, make a bit more new content, not even nearly as much as they had already bought, but now they own it for life and they get to do whatever they want with it, right? And it's a weird conversation that we don't necessarily have about these art house streaming services that they are claiming to be.
Yeah.
Which is because like the majority of the content that they're slapping original on, they don't actually own. They aren't actually putting money behind. Now this is where I think the line in the sand is for Netflix and Hulu, though, is that Netflix takes its ability to do that, right, and takes the win from those things because those are guaranteed wins, and is willing to put then their money behind things that are not necessarily guaranteed wins. You see a lot more kind of like odd projects. I think of like stuff like Pompidou and stuff like that, like really weird like Netflix originals that only get like 5 or 6 episodes, but they get them and like people get to do shit. Altered Carbon, I think, gets to fall into that too. Like that was a total like shot in the dark for them to do like a Blade Runner sci-fi thing, but they're able to do that off of the backs of these things that are guaranteed hits for them because like half the project's already been made, right? Or coming in and getting the last season of Lucifer is like a no-brainer for Netflix. And people will talk about how weird it is that it's not the like Monster of the Week show that it was before, and it's so focused on this weird thing. And it's because they're cutting the fucking fat out of like they don't have to abide by the rules that the other seasons had to. So these artists are actually getting to do something that they've always kind of wanted to do within these worlds. Like, so they kind of get the win there, right? Whereas like Hulu very much expects, if they go out and buy a show, they expect it to stay as much the same as possible. And when they do create a show, you can feel that it's very much like trying to fit into a mold of a show that already exists. Hulu is trying to play the game, whereas like Netflix is trying to just do its own thing. And so that was where I kind of fell on like the two big wigs, right? And so then like the next tier down for me was something like an Amazon Prime, and to see exactly what Prime was bringing to the table. And it's funny because I actually watch a lot of Amazon Prime original stuff, and it was funny because you said to me, I actually don't really know if there's anything that's a Prime original that I could point to.
But then I pointed to something that I think of whenever I think of Amazon Prime, and it is the Tales of Hieronymus Bosch. And that show's fucking great, Sejohn. Oh my god. Yeah. I watched that first episode, and I'm like, why was I not watching Bosch? This is freaking awesome.
My exact words to myself were, well, that's a thing I'm going to have to finish. Like, I was just like, okay, congrats. One episode, and I was just like, okay, okay. Before we get into Bosch itself, because we have to talk about Bosch, let me at least do the thing about Amazon that I've got it in my head.
Yeah,
I think it's really interesting for me that the stuff that I really am drawn to on Amazon is stuff like Bosch and stuff like Jack Ryan. So when Amazon takes its kind of its history into account of being like a storytelling medium, books being like its main thing.
Let's just be honest with it.
When it goes to those types of places, and the great thing about stuff like Jack Ryan and Bosch's stuff is that they're bringing people onto those projects that have the ability to actually like write stories, not write for television, not write movies, but write stories. Because one of the big things with Bosch is that Michael Connelly, who writes the novels for that character, is on as, at least in the first episode, one of 2 writers for that episode. So that's like, that's perfect for me. Like that is to me, that is letting these artists take their own stuff and make the adaptation, as opposed to somebody coming in and changing stuff up. And like, and it's never a guarantee that just because the artist gets to do it that it's going to win big, but it's also never a guarantee that just because somebody outside who touches it. I mean, like we have some time to talk about it when it finally comes out, but we are sitting in the shadow of the Terry Pratchett watch adaptation that's going to be coming out on the BBC, and it's already been facing all sorts of issues and problems with like the advertising and stuff that has come out. But I don't want to talk more about it until I actually see an episode of it or something. But like, to have the actual writers involved, or at least have somebody in the room that has the ability to know how a story is constructed, allows Amazon to make some really, really, really big swings with their projects. Like the Jack Ryan story, the idea of taking something like Clear and Present Danger and stretching it out over 10 episodes can almost feel impossible, and like it's going to get a little too kitschy, or it's going to fall into like the idea of just being 24, and it never does. Like it moves in just all the right ways. You know, I have they done a Jack Reacher show yet? Because if not, I would fucking kill to see a Jack Reacher Amazon show.
The problem with Jack Reacher is that I think Tom Cruise still technically owns some of the rights.
You like make Tom Cruise play him. Let Tom Cruise play him.
I'd be completely fine with it, but Tom Cruise wants to make movies.
Yeah,
Tom Cruise doesn't want to be involved in a show where he's doing episodes. And right now his big focus is on Mission Impossible, because Mission Impossible is guaranteed money in the bank for him.
Yeah.
And I feel like if a Mission Impossible fails, or if it comes down like we don't have a script ready for the next Mission Impossible, he would dip back into the Lee Child's well and play Jack Reacher again. But after Jack Reacher 2 did not perform as well as people wanted it to, and the reason for that is that it was more like the books, where Jack Reacher was like balls to the wall action, and that's what everybody expected from the second one. Is like, no, sometimes Jack Reacher is just like a lawyer's friend.
Yeah, sometimes he's just an investigator. Like that's what he does a lot of the time, is investigating. Like so Amazon really opens the door for these kinds of creative works that are kind of like artists really kind of pushing and expressing themselves in different ways. And I think that that's something that's really cool that you really notice with a lot of the Amazon stuff, is you see people that like artists and stuff specifically behind the camera that you've seen their work before, but this is them getting the opportunity to like try something. And I think that that is something that I don't think a lot of the other services really allow. Is like the last time I can really think of somebody behind camera that I was really impressed with at Netflix is what's his name? So the House of Cards there. Not David Lynch.
I can't.
I can't even think of his name.
Sorry,
but you know what I mean. But that's how far back I have to go before I think of them going to like a famous director. You know, it's cool that like they got Michelle and Barack Obama to produce some stuff, but like I want to see. I want to see some crazy new art from new people, from people that like normally like write books or normally like make music and things like that, you know, like, and that's. So I was really happy today when I was watching Bosch and I saw that Michael Connelly also got to be like the writer on the show. It wasn't just credited to like a character created by him or created from him. No, by him. That was right.
Yeah, by is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, but yeah. So I watched the first episode of Bosch today, and I gotta say, like, I'm still reeling. Like, I'm still dealing with the main like character introduction of Bosch. Like the idea is that he is a rough and tumble like kind of like last of the old like league noir style cops in this LA precinct, and he is currently on trial for a not an accidental shooting, a what he considers to be a justified shooting, but it's being investigated of a suspect.
Well, it's not being investigated, it's a civil trial. He was cleared of all criminal charges by the police department, and now the family is suing him because it's 2 years later, which like the opening of Bosch happens, and I'm like, wow, Bosch was way ahead of where America is in 2021. Like the fact that we are talking about a police shooting and there being consequences, and looking at the past of this officer to see if maybe there's a pattern there. Like, I'm like, this was all being explored, and yet there were people who acted like it was new in 2020.
Yeah. Well, and I attribute a ton of that to Michael Connelly, right? Like
Yeah.
in the ways in which, like, the kind of research that he does when he is writing his books. Like, say what you want about the inequality and the idea of them being basically like airport novels for a lot of people, which is like, I love me a good airport novel. I've talked about that before. But the idea being that, like, there is a lot of intelligent work behind him writing these really popular genre novels that he does.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's clearly a lot going on there. My thing is like, I'm sitting there this whole time, and it's not that I'm hating Bosch. I'm struggling with whether or not I can really allow myself to get attached to this character, because like, he is the titular character of this show, and it opens up with a questionable shooting. And like, and to us, we're kind of shown this scene in shadow, and we don't know whether or not at first the guy had a gun or not. And you have to question, like, was it a justified shooting yourself, even as an audience member? Which, you know, from a meta sense is great. Good storytelling, good like way to like engross me and all that. But like, from this level right now in 2021, as I'm watching it, as I'm just like, that dude just shot a guy, and like, like, there's a chance it wasn't justified. This is the hero of our show? Like, I was really kind of struggling to kind of get into the idea that I was supposed to be rooting for this guy. And I think that
where that is hard for me is, this isn't new, right? Police shootings is not some new thing that started in 2020. It's something that's been going on for a very long time. It's systemic, some would say. But because of that, and I've been doing research and learning it, the real issue there, and the reason why I use the term systemic, is in LA, which has less officers than New York, but is 5 times as large, they are told to go for a kill shot at any act of threat or provocation.
right.
Which is like, so even the fact that that guy reached for it, I'm like, you know, he didn't really have to kill that guy, but we know, because it's been released, that's how they train people in LA. And that's the scarier thing. It's like,
and so because of that, we learn more later on about his backstory, about him being a war veteran, a pretty high-end one from what we can tell. I don't have the full backstory yet, but like, it sounds like he was pretty good at what he did when he was in the army. Like, there's this sense of like, shouldn't he have been better than that I was kind of feeling sometimes. But like, part of it that sort of starts to work for me is like, is watching him deal with it. He outwardly says to people, and this is why I was kind of having trouble in the beginning, is he is so openly saying to people like, I know it was justified. I got no problem. I know it was justified. And you slowly learn throughout the episode that he is having actually some real issues with it. And like, he is like really kind of reeling from what happened. And I think that is part of what came around at the end for me, is really understanding that at the end of this is that he's not okay with what happened. So this isn't just the story of just like a good cop who's just being harassed by the system and like just trying to do his job. It starts in that way and slowly grows into something else. And so it starts in this genre of like the hard-boiled last of the true cops type story that's going on, and then slowly evolves into this much more like involved character study of a guy that has, you know, that is in this place, right? And that I think I'm on board for. And so I'm glad that it became that by the end of the episode, because I don't know if I could put up with it if it was willing to just call him good from the get-go with the actions that I then see in the episode. Because like, on top of seeing him do that sort of thing, he doesn't learn anything about like fucking protocol at that point. Because you would have thought like all of the bullshit that he's getting called out for in those first 5 minutes about not following protocol, going off on his own, all this other bullshit. But then then the very next scene, we see him then go into the office and trick some guys basically into giving them his shift, or giving him their shift, so that he can still work, even though he's been told by his superior officers to stay off the fucking streets until everything settles down. So like, he's just digging himself into bigger and bigger holes a lot of the time. You know what I mean? And that's hard for me to get behind, a character that does that sort of thing. But I'm definitely willing to keep going on this ride, because as I said, where the episode eventually goes is much more interesting than that. Yeah, and it's
And
just
you want to
it's
talk about this being the art house, this is an artist telling a story.
yeah.
The fact that, like, we see him tap his desk where there are three women pictured, and, like, there's no explanation of who those three women are, and then finding out later that, like, he's still haunted by the fact that he couldn't really find justice for those three women that guy allegedly killed.
Yeah.
And, like, that, like it was such a subtle thing that, like, and then when it connected, I'm like, that's so good. And
Yeah.
TV can't do that. Television isn't really allowed to do that because they need to treat it like every episode could be someone's first episode of this show if they're just flipping through. And I know that the landscape of television has changed, but, like, really, that's the type of stuff that, like, that would have been a discussion. Like, his partner would have been like, oh, you're still thinking about those three?
Yeah, right. There would have been, and we would have had a reminder at the beginning of, like, every episode that of, like, what happened to him. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it just felt so good that they let it breathe. And the fact that, like, obviously he's dealing with these things, and that's why he has to work, because he's so obsessed with finding a distraction from what I mean, this is my interpretation of it, but I think he views what happened that night as a failure. He's not happy that he killed that guy. He killed that guy because he felt that he was threatened and he needed to do something in that moment. But that wasn't justice for those girls that were killed. And it doesn't prove that this is the serial killer or if that serial killer is still out there. Like,
Right.
it was so good. And then just the reveals about who Hieronymus Bosch is.
Right.
And like, where he comes from. And the freaking prosecutor and her question of, like, so killing the serial killer, that was like revenge for your mom getting killed? Like, whoa!
Yeah. No, I think the big one for me is I mean, it almost makes you kind of question your own understanding of the character here and there, because I have the impression that he has faced abuse in his life, and I only have that impression because of his reaction to the list of abuses that go on later on with the doctor at the morgue, right, where he's talking about the body that they're both looking at, and his reaction to that. And it's
Sybil
never...
Shepherd's first husband from Sybil, which I was so
Yeah.
happy to see him again. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
he's fucking great. He was phenomenal. Also, that's the other thing, is that I find with Amazon shows most of the time, it's really hard to find a character actor on those shows that I don't love from something. You know, like it's a grab bag of just phenomenal character actors for all of their casts, to round out their casts. But yeah, so it's never outright said, like, oh, I was abused, this is hard for me. It's never outright, like, no other character is like, oh, don't mind him, he was abused when he was a kid. His reaction to what is going on makes you realize this is something that he has gone through himself, and, like, his ability to understand, like, the way that he finishes the doctor's sentences in a couple of moments and things like that. You're like, okay, he gets this from past experience of his own. And, like,
Yeah,
that
when he's
is...
with the guy who found the bone that kicks off the whole thing, and he's like, yeah, that would be a rotator injury. And it's just like, oh, okay, so Bosch is gonna pass.
Yeah, it is a masterclass in show don't tell for an entire episode. It really is. And so it just elevates that stuff. And I mean, like, you want to talk about trying to have your cake and eat it too. I feel like a lot of this is exactly what's going on with NBC, and it's both in its app making and in its show making, is that it's trying so hard to both be this kind of show that we were talking about here with Amazon, but also kind of doing the Hulu thing of, like, but we want you to remember that you're still watching TV. We want you to still have that feeling that this is one of those good old fashioned television shows that you love so much. And, like, so I did NBC Peacock. I signed up just for the free level. Once I realized there was one, I jumped for joy, because I thought I was going to have to pay a little bit of money for this. And I watched the first episode of Saved by the Bell after your glowing recommendations a couple of weeks ago, and me going down this rabbit hole of a journey. I tried it out.
And
by the end of the episode, I was much more on board. The first 10 minutes of that show is not what it should be. Like, the reveal that it is about other kids, and then it actually focusing on those other kids, was much more interesting to me. The idea of Mac really, and I asked you this when you first talked about it. I asked, is Mac the main character? And you said, no, not at all. And that point really isn't driven home until the back half of that first episode, in which he kind of becomes the bad guy of the episode.
Yeah.
And not in like a terrible, like, I hate him way. I'm interested to see his growth possibly as a character, or at least see more of him on screen. But he's very much like a Disney television teen bully villain, right? Like he's unintentionally a shithead to these kids.
As opposed to his father, Zach, who was intentionally a shithead. Like, I don't know if you've gone back to Saved by the Bell, but you think about the things that Zach does to his friends, and
right.
namely his best friend, Screech.
Yeah.
Like, he was the bad guy. Zach was not the hero.
Well, and so this show gets to that point, but it does not. It should have started with that point. It expects too much from its audience in terms of loving old school Saved by the Bell. It really thinks that there's a contingency of people out there right now that were really aching for more Saved by the Bell, in a way that, like, Fuller House really, really kind of primed its viewers to be like, hey, remember this thing? And even if you don't, it's okay, come along with us. This show is like, we know you remember this thing, everybody get back on the train. And it's like, no, man, this train stopped years ago and it's not going anymore. And so when it's not Saved by the Bell anymore, it's a much better show. You know, I think a lot of what Mario Lopez does is kind of perfect, because he comes on screen and instantly you can tell that he is both a satire of who he used to be and trying to be better than he used to be. Like, that combination is important for all characters. Zach never gets there for the 2 seconds that we see him in the episode. Kelly, though, totally manages to get there within the 2 seconds that we see her in the episode. So in a lot of ways, there's almost no excuse for Zach Morris to be as unlikable as he is in this first episode, considering how fast they're able to get there.
But
with Tiffany Amber.
But
yeah,
they make it canon that Franklin and Peter Bash, is Zach Morris going under a pseudonym.
That's actually even worse.
I know.
Because of the good person that he comes
to
be on, Franklin and Bash. I know,
but like,
thrown out the goddamn window.
But you gotta think about that, and like, it's like in the moment you're like, that's so cool, and then you think about it, and it's like, oh, but that's awful though, because
actually awful.
Yeah, but when it first came on screen, I was so happy because I feel like I'm one of the only people who liked Franklin and Bash.
It's one of those things though where, like, it assumes it assumes that everybody that's watching is on board. But if it's going to assume that, and then you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that then it makes a Franklin and Bash joke, thinking everybody that's watching is going to get this joke. It must then be thinking our audience is not very big. And if that's the case, what are you doing, Peacock? What are you doing investing in a show that you're kind of not aiming at a large audience? It's your one true original piece of programming on the network, and you're acting like it's going to be a niche program for people. And in a lot of ways, the first 10 minutes of that episode really are. They really, really are kind of like, it's a niche sense of humor, niche characters that you can really kind of get behind. The second that they introduce this second set of kids that are coming from this other school, and the ways in which they react to this world that these other kids are in, that was when I texted you and I was like, wait a minute. Is this show a satire of original Saved by the Bell? Because I didn't think that for the first 10 minutes. I thought it was trying to just be more of it. And I was like, oh, this is unbearable. But once I realized that it was kind of trying to make fun of itself, then I was like, okay. And then the last 10 minutes of that episode, it's not even that. It's its own thing. It becomes this beautiful, like, thing about these kids, these kids dealing with being in this new school. And it's a whole other level. And what's really interesting to me is, like, they're able to capture in the last third of the episode the spirit of Saved by the Bell that I remember much more than the first third. Whereas, like, the first third is much more the comedy of old Saved by the Bell that I do remember a lot of and how terrible it was. like it kind of, again, like I said before, it wants to eat its cake. It wants to have its cake and eat it too. It is so convinced that it can be everything for all audiences, while at the same time be something for a very specific audience, and you can't do that. So like it's this really weird mishmash throughout that entire episode, and I get the feeling throughout the series of like we don't quite know where we fall on these characters, on these issues, on these concepts, like on this joke, on this one line of a joke. We're not sure if it's going to be funny or sweet, so let's just drive it home as both and see what happens. And it turns out to just be offensive. It's like, okay, like there's this really weird like lack of understanding of what itself is throughout the entire thing.
Yeah. So as someone who's watched the whole series, you've only watched the first episode.
Yes.
What I feel like they were trying to do, playing devil's advocate here, is exactly what you just described. I think that first third of the episode is to remind you how actually unbearable Saved by the Bell was. A lot of the time. And then they introduce you to the new thing, and then they try to blend that. And if you're not on board after seeing that first episode and the way that it's structured, you're probably not going to watch the second episode. But if you were on board, you go forward into the second episode, and going forward through it, each episode is like 90% that final third of the pilot episode of the new Saved by the Bell.
Yeah.
And only like a couple of moments that are unbearable. But you also have the new students, and a lot of the time they're like, is this like really something that happens here? Like, is this really how this world works? Yeah. Or like, do you guys really come to eat at a fast food restaurant every day after school? Like,
yeah, stupid magic restaurant. That was a great joke. That moment when she then later goes looking for money and is like, oh fuck, I spent it all at that restaurant that they all go to every day.
Like that type of satire and like questioning of what the show was is what the bulk of the series is. And that's why it works for me, and that's why I think it's so enjoyable. But that first episode is not the way to build an audience. I will agree with you. But
I mean, but right off the bat, my first suggestion is introduce us to the new kids first. Let us see that that's what's coming. Because without knowing that, I had no idea what that show wanted to be.
See, but the issue is, you're not the target audience for Saved by the Bell. I mean that in a good way. That's like that's a high compliment that I just paid you, Sejohn, that you're not who they were aiming for to get to watch this series. The target audience for Saved by the Bell was people who were still on the Saved by the Bell train. People who never got off. People who were nostalgic for that show, who probably have TBS on every morning to like just hear the theme song, if not watch the episode. Right? That was the target audience. So if they had led with the new characters, all of those people would have stopped before it got to the part that was trying to speak to them. By leading with the bullshit that just feels like an episode of Saved by the Bell, those people are tricked into staying on board to the point where they get to this new storytelling that like actually kind of has a message behind it.
Yeah. I guess my thing is like that feels like such a small audience to be aiming for when there's a so much wider audience that Peacock because for right now it is going to be synonymous with the entire app, because it is really the only type of original programming you can point to on that app that has any like merit to it, as far as I'm concerned. And so Peacock cannot afford to start off with a show that is meant for a niche audience. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Like they need something else that is appealing to everybody, and they're thinking that is, and this is where the issue is they think that that's The Office. They think that that's the big appeal grab for them, and I can almost forgive them for thinking that because of the attitude of people with The Office over the last 15 years, as specifically the way that it has been received on streaming services, and when the news was coming that it was going to be leaving Netflix, and everybody was like, everybody was talking about how Netflix was going to see a big drop of, it was going to be the end of Netflix, right? Supposedly. Yet here we are, 2 weeks into 2021, and I don't see an issue yet. Is like everybody was talking about how it was going to be the end of Netflix with the Office leaving, and all these people talking about it was the only reason that they were paying for it and all this other stuff. And lo and behold, like Peacock's falling on its face now, and Netflix is doing fine. So clearly, that was not they read the room wrong. Is I guess what I'm saying.
And like power to Netflix, because this wasn't the first time. They experienced the same thing with Friends, and everybody being like, "I'm gonna lose Netflix now that they don't have Friends anymore." And
They experienced this
HBO
with
Max,
Futurama.
who? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Like-
mean, when Hulu first started getting into the game of buying up shows, and they announced that they were going to get Futurama and it was going to be leaving Netflix, I remember people then talking about how they were done with Netflix because they were just going to move over to Hulu. And then what ended up happening? Everybody had both, and
Yep.
it's the same thing that's going to happen with Peacock.
Yeah, and honestly, and that we all kind of lose as consumers in that market but they don't win. That's the more important thing. Mm-hmm. Peacock doesn't become a Netflix killer. Peacock just becomes another utility that we pay for. And while that is a hit to our wallets if we're the people who are paying for it, it's better than the scenario where Peacock gets The Office and suddenly Netflix loses the funding to be able to produce the quality content that we were talking about an hour ago.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, just because we are going long here, and I did not give as much due to the other services that we mentioned, but I did check out Ted Lasso, and phenomenal. I'm a big sucker for the fish out of water, specifically the American guy going to England stories that have come out. There's been a few of them over the last few years. One of my favorites is Todd Margaret. I fucking loved Todd Margaret. And anybody that gets the chance to check that shit out, like, it is such a good. I think it's only like 12 episodes because I think it was only 2 seasons and 6 episodes each. Yeah. But Ted Lasso is the perfect balance of there's a little bit of a mean streak in it currently, and I think that's just because of how it's starting with the idea that he shows up and everybody's like, who the fuck is this guy? But he brings so much heart as a character to that show. I think I was a little worried with some of the advertisements and stuff that it was going to make him look like an idiot, but I don't think that Ted is an idiot in any way now after watching the first episode. Very happy to see that he is very aware of the world around him, and in it's
just wait. Please watch the rest of Ted Lasso.
Oh, I'm in. I'm
because it's
very
so good. Like the first episode, the way that you're talking about it, like my issue with the first episode of Ted Lasso was I really don't like this one negative thing. Everything else about this show works for me, but there's this one negative thing that's a shadow over the series, and it bothers me. And guess what the first season is about? Breaking through that shadow.
Yeah. So I'm very much sold on that. I think where Apple stands in this case, though, is that they don't have the marketability of any of these other programs, any of these other services that we've talked about. Like, I don't know. I don't watch a lot of like full television anymore. I know you watch more of it with your DVR and stuff. Like, are there commercials for Apple TV shows? Not just like Apple TV, but Apple TV shows out there?
There are commercials for Apple TV movies and Apple TV shows.
Yeah. I'm not seeing them anywhere. Like, they're not online. Like, they don't have like a YouTube presence. They don't have a even like fucking like ads on Reddit or something. Like, nothing. It seems like they are very comfortable with the audience they already have, and they're happy to get more of one, but they're very happy with the audience they already have, which 20 years ago would have made more sense when everybody had an iPod in their pocket or everybody had an iPhone 5 years later. But like, that's just not the case anymore. Yeah. They don't, not everybody's in the Apple ecosystem anymore.
Yeah. And that's the problem. And Apple is going to be playing catch up with that. I think that they expected that people will come to us the way that they have. And I have to imagine that after the 2 years that Apple TV has been a thing, that they have to have seen we need to do something. Yeah. And I mean, Ted Lasso, my mother found out about it, and I wanted to watch it, but I didn't know how to convince my parents to watch it. Yeah. That was the issue. And it was my mother saying, oh, I heard about this show. It's on Apple TV, though. And I'm like, well, we have that. And they put it on. And then, the thing that I hate about it is that my mother takes credit for it. We wouldn't have watched it if it wasn't for me. And I'm like, I didn't know how to get you guys to watch it. Because I felt like if I recommended it, you guys might just say no because it was coming from me. which I have seen with other things that I have recommended. Because I'm a unique individual who likes niche type of stuff. And like,
Yeah. I think that I think, but that's just it, right? Is it's going to take a lot more people like your mom, even outside of you being on the train beforehand. It's going to take a lot more people like your mom to just figure it out, and that's just really weird for me. like that's their market, like is people that just kind of find them, and that's a shame because if they're producing a lot of work like they are with Ted Lasso, more of it deserves to be seen. It's nothing.
The fact is, they're not though.
Yeah.
Ted Lasso is kind of, there's a reason why I recommended Ted Lasso and not any of the, like, of the ones that you asked me to recommend for, Apple TV is the one I've done the most exploring in.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't recommend the morning show to you because it is wildly off balance until it, like, calcifies in the last episode of the first season. Like, I'm excited for season 2 of the morning show, but I don't know if I'm excited enough to subscribe to Apple TV if my subscription is no longer live when that happens.
How did the musical one from the guy that did Bob's go?
Central Park,
Richard.
Grand
Yeah,
Central.
how's that one?
I haven't watched it, and that kills me. I know that it's having controversy because of voice actors casting people who were not the race of the character they were portraying. So that's been more the discussion about Central Park than the content.
I mean, and not that the conversation shouldn't be had, but that has been something that Laurent Bouchard has dealt with his entire career. I'm saying that right?
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember but look at Bob's alone, like the conversation about like how the majority of the women on that show are actually played by men and stuff like that has always been something in the water when talking about that his work, and so. That doesn't surprise me, but like that's kind of the big thing that I hear a lot about Apple TV outside of not hearing about Apple TV is anything that comes up from it, like Ted Lasso. You were the only person I knew that had seen it, and like this one that was, what is it called? The park? Is it called the park?
Central Park.
It's called Central Park.
Yep.
In my head, I just don't want it to be called that for some reason. I don't know why.
No, I mean,
but like the idea that like everybody I know is like, oh yeah, that new one from the guy that does Bob's Burgers. I haven't seen it yet. It's just like yeah, that seems to be the consensus. Is there's a lot of stuff on there on Apple TV that people are aware of, but like they don't know where it is. They don't understand how to watch it. They just haven't gotten around to dealing with Apple. To like, I had to create a new Apple ID today just to watch Ted Lasso.
Well, because, I've had my Apple ID for, 16 years, and it has been such a fight with my Apple account, like just recently, where it's like, you need to confirm your account has been locked. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything different than I did before, Apple. What is happening with you?
Right?
Like, so it's strange that, but what I think Apple TV's market, I'm trying to think of it. The way that they market themselves is when a new show comes out, they try to create word of mouth. That's what they did with Ted Lasso. They got in my mother's ear. That's what got her to want to watch an episode. And then because we were on Apple TV, she's like, oh, the morning show? I'll check that out. And then I'm like, you know what? Since we're doing it, I'll check out Mythic Quest. And Mythic Quest was not very good. And that made me sad. Like, I watched one episode and I'm like, eh. But then there's also that thought, like, but everything on Apple TV takes more than one episode.
Yeah.
And the hope is that because you're already there, you'll try the next episode. And for Mythic Quest, that didn't happen. For the morning show, it did. For Ted Lasso, it did. Because there was enough good. And I think that they also try to do that with the film stuff. Like when Greyhound came out, the Tom Hanks World War II movie.
Right.
Like, people were talking about Apple TV that week that it came out. And then it got quiet again. And then On the Rocks, the new Sofia Coppola, Bill Murray collaboration, people were talking about Apple TV again. And then the next week it's silent and nobody's talking about it. To the fact that my mother, I want to watch the new Bill Murray movie. I'm like, okay, it's on Apple TV. She's like, excellent. And then next week, when it's her turn to pick a movie, she's like, I have no idea what to pick. And I go, well, there's that Bill Murray movie on Apple TV that you, like, a week ago you wanted to watch. And she's like, no, let's pick something else. And it's like, oh, okay. So like Apple wants to catch you in that one zeitgeist moment, and if you're not on the line, then you swim away until the next time they cast something that entices you.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's they if they could capture any essence of the marketability that they had even 10 years ago, Apple TV could take off like a fucking rocket. It just, I don't know what they're doing differently than they were, but honestly, I think that's the problem, is they're not doing anything differently than they were 10 years ago.
The
So they
big
just didn't
problem
change.
is in the beginning, you could only get Apple TV on an Apple TV.
Right.
And they have not done enough to teach people that you can get it on Roku, you can get it on Amazon Fire, you can just access it via your computer without iTunes. They haven't done enough to do that.
Yeah.
So like even my father, he's like, man, I'd really like to watch this, but Apple TV, we don't have one. And I'm like, yeah, we watched Ted Lasso. That was on Apple TV. So we have that. We have access to that.
Oh, man, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Just a rundown of the other ones that we talked about. HBO Max, you put down Close Enough. I've watched so much of that show. I fucking love that show.
It's so good. Well, because HBO Max, like, it feels like that's its only original thing. Everything else is just like, I can't pick an HBO show that's on HBO Max because then it's not technically an original. Like, Close Enough feels like the only original thing that's come out on HBO Max.
I mean, I'll give it Doom Patrol 2.
Right, but Doom Patrol 2 did premiere on DC Universe.
Yeah, it's just they're one and the same to me now. I know, like,
they're one and the same now. It's not just to you. It's happened.
But that's what I mean. It's like, yeah, they're doing their thing. They've had a couple of other ones in that vein. What is the mushroom one? The Fergies? I believe it might be the Fergies. That one's pretty good. I gotta say, where the mushroom people can take their body parts off. It is good old-fashioned, weird late-night cartoon stuff again. Yeah, so the HBO has got its own thing going on, but it's going to be fine. That's the other thing I get about the HBO Max app, is I feel like no matter what, when I get on there and I'm like, oh, I can't find anything today, but you know what? That's okay. In a couple of weeks, I'll come back on here and I'll find a bunch of things. And it's happened. It's happened a few times.
Yeah.
The rotating movie schedule really helps them out in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so CBS All Access, you mentioned The Good Fight. I checked out an episode of The Good Fight. I'm a sucker for Monster of the Week style, like let's deal with this thing type shows. It honestly felt a lot like Scandal. I'm not going to lie, as somebody that watched a lot of Scandal, but I'm sure if I watched more of
So can you tell me what episode you watched?
You recommended season 3, episode 2 specifically.
Yeah, the one inspired by Ray Cohn.
Yeah. And like, and very good. And like I said, I think I would care more about it if I hadn't started in season 3. But also, I don't know if like just a pilot episode of that show is enough.
Right. Well, really, I picked that one because Michael Sheen is just so fucking good in that episode. Yeah. It's incredible. But it's one of those things where that episode specifically is very Scandalesque.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like the show. What The Good Fight does best is ape other TV.
Okay.
Like the 4th season, their truncated 4th season because of COVID. Every episode was a parody of not a parody, was an homage to a movie.
Okay.
Like the first one is It's a Wonderful Life, and the last one is Citizen Kane. And then in between there's a Few Good Men episode, and we're like, this is exactly what we're looking at. And we're existing in the world that this film created with these characters. And it's insane. Like,
that's crazy.
The reason why I picked The Good Fight, I knew you couldn't watch all like 40 episodes that exist of it, like in the week that you had. But if you were to sit down and do it, you see that like it is that artistic thing. It's people who understand television trying to be artistic within that medium.
Yeah, so The Good Fight is on TV, right? Like,
no,
it isn't. No,
it is
this is one of those ones that is exclusive to the app.
So at the start of the 3rd season, and like I talked before, where CBS is always looking to fill a time slot. Like, it just feels
Right.
like the CBS problem.
Right,
They
right.
aired the first season on broadcast television, but because the other one is for streaming and does not have to abide by broadcast standards and practices, there were a lot of times where it would go to a black screen and say, "This is too racy for broadcast television. To see the unedited version of this episode, please subscribe to CBS All Access."
Jesus. Oh my God.
And
It's
like,
it's
and
the nightmare scenario, and like you're doing it to the worst group of to the worst audience. You old people that also don't understand technology are now being told that technology is ruining their television experience. Is like, sorry, that scares the crap out of me.
right, like, well, and the reason why we ended up getting CBS All Access was my mother heard that a fourth season was coming, and she's like, "We should finish the ones that we have on the DVR." And I'm like, "Yeah," because we had watched like 5 of them, and then we just other new shows came on, so it kind of got backburnered. And then I'm like, okay. And then we watched, and the very first episode included that. And Mom's like, "Wait a minute, what season is this?" And I'm like, "Season 1." And she's like, "And it's season 4? We're going to CBS All Access." And I'm like, "Okay, but if we do that, we need to commit to watching everything in the month that we have CBS All Access."
Mm-hmm.
And we did it. And the fact that I have CBS All Access again right now, I love CBS All Access. I'm gonna just be honest with you, because I like CBS shows. I live
Streaming app. I cannot think about it as anything but the streaming app for old people. It's just,
but it's so good because
Yeah.
because watching CBS shows on demand is garbage.
yeah.
But like, if I can sit down and watch Magnum PI in just 40 minutes without having to deal with the DVR, or like the chance that maybe the front or the back got cut off, it just is so satisfying.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But then their original content, like, they say the fuck word and they show nudity, and it's incredible. Like,
it feels like it is your grandmother and your grandfather's streaming app, and it's going to be hard for it to break that for me.
yeah.
But I'm
Well,
glad,
and that's why they're trying to like, one of the other reasons why I would have pushed you to do CBS All Access is that probably by March of this year, it's going to become Paramount Plus. And it's still going to have all the stuff that you know and love from CBS All Access, but under that Paramount banner.
See, now that's really interesting to me. If they can go the HBO Warner Brothers route and team up and make a really good TV and movie app, they might have something there. It's so much more interesting to me than Peacock. I just can't tell you how much more interesting that is to me than Peacock.
I don't blame you, man. Peacock is the one that I use the least, but I don't pay for it. My father pays for it for Yellowstone.
Nice.
So I don't feel bad. Like, he's like, "I want Yellowstone." And I'm like, "Okay, fine. $10 a month. You can watch Yellowstone." And then occasionally I get to slip in and watch a Saved by the Bell, or like Savage Dragon is on Peacock because it was a USA animated series.
Okay, all right.
God, Savage Dragon did not age well at all. Like, it was supposed to be like the gritty, and like, as someone who's like, I've met Eric Larson because he's friends with the Turtle people, so he's been at signings. It's just like, man, like, that was gritty in '95, and like now that show is like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we're doing this now. All right. All right. Yeah. And last but not least was Disney Plus, but we could sit on that one for next week because I want to go a little bit deeper on that one.
Which means that I also have to go a little bit deeper on that one. But so that you get your Disney Plus fill from the Say Report this week, Mulan 2020, I will admit, it's got a lot of problematic stuff about its production and release. But now, if you have Disney Plus, you no longer need to pay $30 to watch it. It's just included in your subscription price. And for me, it is what I wanted Wonder Woman 1984 to be.
Okay. Look, I have had a lot of people around me that are not nearly as invested in the politics of this stuff like you and I are, and so they were very quick to, even when Mulan was $30, pay the money to see it because they wanted to see it. And I have had a lot of issues personally with coming to terms with whether or not I'm going to watch that movie because of the politics around it. But you're not the first person that I've heard talk about it enjoying it. So that's really kind of interesting to me that's the comparison you're making, because that might be the thing that finally tips the
Well,
scales to make me
if you
watch it.
finished Wonder Woman 1984, you would see that like it's imagery and storytelling and like all this stuff that like Wonder Woman 84 uses the same imagery as Mulan. And I'm just like, well, if you had come out in 2018, I would be saying Mulan stole from you.
Yeah.
But you didn't. And so I see Mulan, which released, you know, like I think August of 2020, maybe September. Like it was like 3 months before it was free in December on Disney Plus. And you know, I watched 84 first, and then I watched Mulan, and I'm just like, wow, like this is a better Wonder Woman 84. And obviously if I hadn't seen Wonder Woman 84, I couldn't make that comparison, but I don't doubt that if I had seen Mulan first, I would have compared the two.
Yeah. Interesting.
And
interesting.
But you're not wrong about, I was dreading it. It's the fact that we're starting Quentin Tarantino as our Saturday movie stuff beginning next Saturday, but we had to wait until next Saturday because Reservoir Dogs isn't streaming anywhere until the 12th of January.
Okay.
And we have every other one. We don't have Reservoir Dogs. And I didn't want to pay for it when I knew if I wait a week, we can watch it on a streaming service that we pay for already. And everybody agreed to that. So what we did is we put 4 movies that we kind of had an interest in into a hat and let fate decide. And when Mulan 2020 came out, everybody was like, what were the other options? And we're like, no, we're going to live and we're going to die by the hat. The hat has chosen.
The hat has chosen. I love it.
And we watched Mulan 2020, and everybody was like, that was awesome. I didn't think it was going to be that good. So,
oh man.
Yeah, and if you see it, we can have a deeper discussion about it. But it really is, if you have Disney Plus and you haven't seen it, and you're looking for something, I'd recommend Mulan 2020. And if you have an issue, come find me, because I'd love to have the discussion with you. And the issue can't be about the production and all of the other stuff. Like, I'm aware of that. I know that all that happened, and I'm not saying because the movie was good, any of that should be forgiven. I'm just saying, in addition to all that negativity, the movie was kind of enjoyable.
It's a product that now exists in the world. At this point, like, there's no not making it. Yeah, it's a weird place to be in. Like, to be woke in the year 2021 is a weird position to be in.
What an interesting thing you bring up that I didn't think we were going to talk about on the show, but like, I want to just give it a minute. Scott Pilgrim, the complete edition, releases this week again.
Okay.
And in 2010, when that game came out, I bought it without thinking. I didn't know that Ubisoft was behind it. I just knew it's Scott Pilgrim and I want to play it. But now in 2021, knowing what we know about Ubisoft, I'm having some difficulty on whether or not I'm going to get this re-release of Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you have to figure, is it going to be worth it to talk about and be part of the conversation of that game? I mean, like, I don't have a love for that game that necessitates me buying it. But if it shows up for like $5 somewhere, I'll probably drop $5 on it.
I mean, that's sort of where I'm at, is that I don't want to spend day one prices on this game. Yeah. On Thursday, I could just set up my PS3 and play it there. Like, that's an option that I have because I bought it then. But when it is on sale, and a significant sale, not just $5 off, I'm talking 50% or more, then I would feel comfortable getting it again, because I'd like to play it with you via online. I'd like to see if the online has gotten any better, because it wasn't good at all 11 years ago when it released.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, man. We'll have to wrestle with that if and when it ever comes down to our price range, because you're, again, the same thing with Mulan, right? Like, I know the politics behind it, and I'm not happy about supporting it, and like, I don't have to either. I'm in a position where I can still say I'm not going to do it. I just have to come to terms with whether or not the idea that the product is already out there, and in this case, like Scott Pilgrim is not the game that like drove people to these like terrible places, right? At least not
One
that I
would
know of at the
certainly
moment.
hope so.
But yeah. So I don't know, man. I am still firmly in the position of if it becomes a cheap thing, I still want to check it out. But yeah, at what point do you draw a line and do you say I'm just not going to consume media anymore? And God
Right.
knows that's never going to be
I
us.
know it's always the sliding scale of what you're willing to put up with, what you're
Yeah.
willing to forgive. And I wasn't prepared for it to reach into video games, even though like I haven't played Red Dead Redemption 2, a game that I was chomping at the bit for once I realized just how poorly those people were treated while making that game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and like I said, and I only own Cyberpunk because I bought a Stadia and it was included.
Yeah.
Like, I do not know. That's a lot of things that we talked about. I'm a tease, right? I'm a tease right now for the next episode. I'm going to make Sejohn hear this story next week because I watched On the Rocks, which meant that I finally went back to Lost in Translation.
Oh.
And I figured out why I didn't like Lost in Translation the first time that I watched it.
Okay.
But that is a story. That is a story that I would love to have you like interact with and interject on. And we're already like crazy long this episode because we became politicos in the beginning of the episode. And I'm not mad about that. Like, I'm glad that we were able to have a discussion about that. But
Yeah.
I lost in translation on the next episode of the Say Report is just something
man.
that I'm going to say. And you're all going to have to deal with it.
Oh man, yeah, it was a wild ride doing the streaming stuff this week. It was a lot to kind of dive into, but I'm kind of glad I did it because I now have some different like ideas about what I'm willing to look into and what games I'm willing to play in order to get it. You know, like I was seriously searching to see if I could just buy Ted Lasso just on its own, rather than have to pay for Apple TV.
I know it's like one of those things.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: if you're someone who's like interested because we mentioned Ted Lasso, and you're thinking I'll wait till the second season comes out, Apple is one of those weird ones that does a weekly release of stuff. So don't get it the day that it premieres. Get it once you know that the season is over.
Right.
So that you can consume everything in one go and not have to like risk getting another month of the subscription service.
Oh, if only they could put out like a book of some kind that could be delivered to you that would let you know what was on each week and like perhaps had small descriptions so that you could decide like, am I going to schedule to watch this week? Am I going to wait and watch it next week?
You mean
What
like
would
a
you call
guide
that?
for television?
Some type of guide for television. You're right. And they should do a guide for television.
Like a TV guide. That'd be wonderful. Dude, like reminder, right? I've mentioned it before. I miss the TV Guide channel. Nothing better than going to a party that had a TV on, switching it to the TV Guide channel, and just standing nearby drinking. That was my icebreaker in college.
Oh, man.
God, that makes me sound real lame, but I'm a cool guy, right? I'm a cool guy.
I think it's time that we end this before you dig a deeper hole.
All right. So do you have anything else to add?
Oh man, it's been a crazy week, and like I hid from a lot of the world with my TV watching, and sometimes you got to do that. But I think next week is gonna have to be a little bit more of a going out week.
Yeah, man. Self-care is important, but like it's all about balance. Life is a balancing act. And I know that in the pandemic, that balance has been very difficult to maintain, but like you just try to find your bliss and your happiness and your way to keep things in a proper balance.
Here.
You're here. All right. So if you would like to yell at me, I guess primarily about Mulan 2020, but really anything that we talked about or just anything that's, stuck in your craw, you can find me on Twitter at Devon D. Decker.
And I have all of these services that we talked about today for a minimum of the next week or two because of various free trials and ownerships and all that happened. So if there's anything you want to recommend to me, hit me up at Siege vs. the World.
All right. So until next time, let's throw it to our own Mako Merman. Will, Please bring us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.